July 28, 1971, Danny Rivers, lead guitarist and frontman of the internationally acclaimed rock band Electric Storm, stood on the stage of Madison Square Garden, looking out at 20,000 screaming fans who had paid premium prices to see what would unknowingly become his final performance as a commercial rock star. At 25, Danny had achieved everything the music industry could offer: platinum albums, sold-out world tours, magazine covers, and enough money to buy anything he desired. His band's psychedelic rock sound had captured the zeitgeist of the late 60s, making them one of the most successful acts of their generation, alongside the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Led Zeppelin. But as Danny played the opening chords of their biggest hit that night, he felt nothing but emptiness and disconnection from the music that had once been his passion. What he didn't know was that in the audience sat a mysterious woman named Sage, who would change his understanding of music, love, and the meaning of authentic living so profoundly that within 6 months he would abandon his multi-million-dollar career to join her at a remote commune in Northern California, trading stadium stages for campfire gatherings and commercial success for spiritual awakening. Danny's journey to rock stardom had been the classic American dream story: a working-class kid from Detroit who taught himself guitar and songwriting, formed a band with high school friends, and caught the attention of record executives who recognized their potential to capture the rebellious energy of the counterculture movement. Electric Storm's music combined hard rock instrumentation with psychedelic experimentation and lyrics that spoke to the generation coming of age during the Vietnam War era. Their 1968 debut album had gone triple platinum, their 1970 follow-up had topped charts worldwide, and their current tour was breaking attendance records in every city. Danny's face appeared on the covers of Rolling Stone and Melody Maker. His romantic relationships were documented by tabloid magazines, and his lifestyle of expensive cars, luxury hotels, and constant parties epitomized rock and roll excess. But success had come with costs that Danny was only beginning to understand. The creative freedom that had initially attracted him to music had been gradually compromised by record label executives who demanded commercially viable songs rather than artistic experimentation. The camaraderie he had shared with his bandmates had been strained by financial pressures, ego conflicts, and the constant stress of touring and recording. Most troubling of all, Danny had lost connection with the spiritual and emotional motivations that had originally inspired his songwriting, finding himself mechanically performing songs that no longer reflected his inner experience or authentic voice. "I feel like I'm playing someone else's music," he had confided to his manager just weeks before the Madison Square Garden show. "I don't recognize myself in these songs anymore." The drug use that had begun as creative experimentation had evolved into a daily necessity for managing the anxiety and depression that shadowed Danny's public success. Alcohol, marijuana, and increasingly harder substances provided temporary escape from the hollowness he felt despite his material achievements, but they also deepened his sense of disconnection from his music, his relationships, and his authentic self. His bandmates were struggling with similar issues, creating a toxic dynamic where their collective addiction enabled individual self-destruction while compromising their musical abilities and personal relationships. "We're not artists anymore," Danny realized during a particularly difficult recording session. "We're just drug addicts who happen to play music professionally." The turning point that would change everything came not during the performance itself, but during the meet and greet session afterward, when record label executives paraded wealthy fans and industry insiders past the band for photo opportunities and networking conversations. Most of these encounters were formulaic exchanges with people who wanted to associate themselves with celebrity culture, but one interaction was dramatically different. A woman who introduced herself simply as Sage approached Danny with a presence that seemed to cut through the artificial atmosphere of backstage entertainment industry politics. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with long dark hair, flowing clothes that suggested artistic sensibility rather than fashion consciousness, and eyes that seemed to see through the rock star persona to something deeper and more authentic underneath. "Your music has lost its soul," Sage said without preamble, her voice gentle but unwavering in its directness. "I can hear the pain underneath the performance, the longing for something real beneath all the commercial polish. You're performing someone else's vision of who you should be instead of expressing who you actually are." Her words hit Danny like a physical blow, not because they were harsh, but because they articulated something he had been feeling but couldn't express. Most people who met him either praised his success or wanted something from him, but Sage seemed genuinely concerned about his spiritual and artistic well-being, rather than impressed by his celebrity status. The conversation that followed challenged every assumption Danny had formed about success, creativity, and the purpose of music in human culture. Sage spoke about music as a sacred practice, a way of connecting individual consciousness with universal harmony, a tool for healing and transformation rather than entertainment and profit. She described communities where artists lived according to principles of cooperation and spiritual growth, where creativity served the collective well-being rather than individual ego, where the distinction between performer and audience dissolved into shared experience of beauty and transcendence. Music isn't something you do for other people, she explained. It's something you do with other people, as a form of worship, as a way of celebrating the divine energy that flows through all living things. Danny found himself opening up to Sage in ways he hadn't shared with anyone in years, describing his growing disillusionment with the music industry, his struggles with addiction, and his longing for creative work that felt meaningful rather than merely profitable. Sage listened with the kind of attention that made him feel truly heard for the first time in years, offering insights that came from genuine wisdom rather than professional expertise. "You don't have to choose between making music and living authentically," she told him as the backstage area gradually emptied around them. "But you do have to choose between serving your art and serving the industry that's corrupted your art. Those are two completely different kinds of service, and they lead to completely different kinds of life." Before you continue this incredible journey of artistic awakening and spiritual transformation with us, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories of courage, creativity, and the power of love to change everything. The attraction between Danny and Sage was immediate and intense, but it was based on something deeper than the superficial romantic encounters that had characterized his relationships during his years of fame. Sage seemed completely unimpressed by his celebrity status, while being deeply interested in his authentic self, his creative struggles, and his spiritual yearnings. When she mentioned that she was returning to an intentional community in Northern California, where artists, musicians, and spiritual seekers lived according to principles of sustainability and collective creativity, Danny felt a pull toward something he couldn't name but desperately wanted to experience. "What would happen if I just left all of this behind?" he asked, gesturing toward the backstage chaos of his rock star life. "What would happen if I chose to prioritize my soul over my career?" Sage's response was both invitation and challenge. "You'd discover who you really are when you're not trying to be who the industry wants you to be," she replied. "You'd find out whether your music can survive without the machinery of commercial success supporting it. You'd learn whether you're an artist who happens to be famous or just a famous person who happens to play music." The distinction resonated with Danny's deepest fears about his own identity and authenticity. Had his success been based on genuine talent and artistic vision, or simply on his ability to give audiences what they wanted to hear? Was he capable of creating meaningful music without the validation of commercial success and industry approval? The decision to see Sage again, despite his band's grueling tour schedule and the disapproval of his manager and record label executives, marked the beginning of Danny's psychological separation from the music industry that had defined his adult life. Over the following weeks, he found himself calling Sage from different cities, having conversations about art, spirituality, and alternative ways of living that provided more satisfaction than anything related to his professional career. Her influence helped him recognize how completely his authentic self had been subsumed by his public persona, how thoroughly his creative instincts had been co-opted by commercial considerations. "I've been living someone else's life," he realized during one of their long phone conversations. "I've been so busy being Danny Rivers the rock star that I forgot how to be just Danny." The internal conflict between his growing desire for authentic living and his contractual obligations to complete the tour created increasing tension that affected every aspect of Danny's life. His performances became more erratic as he struggled to maintain enthusiasm for songs that no longer reflected his inner experience. His relationships with bandmates deteriorated as they sensed his growing detachment from their shared enterprise, and his substance abuse escalated as he sought relief from the cognitive dissonance between his public role and private yearnings. "I can't continue pretending to be passionate about music that feels spiritually dead to me," he told his bass player during a particularly difficult conversation. but I also can't figure out how to get out of this without destroying everything we've built together." The crisis that forced Danny's decision came during the band's performance in San Francisco, just 50 miles from the Commune where Sage lived. The proximity to an alternative way of life that he had been contemplating for months made the artificiality of his current existence unbearable. As he stood on stage looking out at thousands of fans who were cheering for an image rather than a person, Danny experienced what could only be described as an existential emergency. "I felt like I was dying inside," he later described the moment. "I was surrounded by people who claimed to love my music, but I realized that they didn't know me at all, and the music they thought they loved wasn't really mine anymore. It belonged to the industry, to the image, to everything except my actual soul." The morning after the San Francisco concert, Danny made a decision that would shock the music industry and transform his life forever. Instead of boarding the tour bus with his bandmates for their next scheduled performance in Los Angeles, he rented a car and drove north toward Mendocino County, where Sage had told him about Morning Star Ranch, a commune that had become legendary in counterculture circles for its radical experiments in communal living, free love, and artistic collaboration. His manager had left 17 increasingly frantic voicemails. His record label executives were threatening legal action for breach of contract, and his bandmates were torn between anger at his abandonment and concern for his mental health. But for the first time in years, Danny felt like he was moving toward something authentic rather than running away from his problems. The drive through Northern California's redwood forests and rolling hills provided Danny with his first taste of the natural beauty that would become central to his new understanding of creativity and spirituality. After years of traveling between concrete cities and sterile recording studios, the organic curves of the landscape and the peaceful silence broken only by birdsong and wind through trees felt like a return to something essential he had forgotten existed. "I realized I hadn't really looked at a tree in years," he later wrote in his journal. "I had been so focused on artificial environments, stages, studios, hotel rooms, that I had lost connection with the natural world that had inspired my earliest songs." Morning Star Ranch challenged every assumption Danny had formed about how communities could organize themselves and how individuals could relate to each other. Instead of the hierarchical structures that characterize the music industry, the commune operated through consensus decision-making that gave everyone equal voice in determining collective direction. Instead of the competitive dynamics that had poisoned his relationships with other musicians, residents collaborated on creative projects without concern for individual credit or commercial potential. Instead of the material accumulation that had become his measure of success, the community emphasized voluntary simplicity and sharing resources according to need rather than ability to pay. Sage's role at Morning Star was that of an informal spiritual teacher and conflict resolution facilitator, using her intuitive wisdom and communication skills to help residents navigate the inevitable challenges of communal living. Her background was as mysterious as her first impression had suggested. She had grown up in a wealthy East Coast family, but had rejected conventional paths to success in favor of spiritual seeking and alternative community building. Her connection to Danny was clearly special, but she was careful not to let their romantic relationship create divisions within the larger community or exempt them from the collective responsibilities that all residents shared. The adjustment to commune life was initially challenging for someone accustomed to the luxury and individual attention that surrounded rock star existence. Danny had to learn basic survival skills like organic gardening, food preservation, and construction techniques that were completely foreign to his urban background and celebrity lifestyle. More difficult still was adapting to the emotional intimacy and vulnerability that characterized relationships at Morning Star, where personal conflicts were addressed through community meetings rather than avoidance, and where individual growth was seen as collective responsibility rather than private concern. "I had to learn how to be a person rather than a persona," Danny reflected. "I had to discover who I was when I wasn't performing for anyone." The musical culture at Morning Star was unlike anything Danny had experienced during his commercial career. Instead of rehearsed performances for passive audiences, music emerged organically from daily life: work songs during collective labor, meditation music for spiritual practices, celebration songs for community gatherings. Anyone could contribute regardless of technical skill level, and the emphasis was on participation rather than perfection, on healing rather than entertainment, on spiritual expression rather than commercial appeal. Danny's sophisticated musical abilities were appreciated, but they didn't grant him special status or authority within the community's egalitarian structure. The creative breakthrough that reconnected Danny with his authentic musical voice came during a community ritual designed to help residents release old identities and embrace new possibilities. As part of this ceremony, Danny was invited to symbolically bury his rock star persona by burning memorabilia from his commercial career: gold records, magazine covers, concert posters, and other symbols of his former success. The ritual was both cathartic and terrifying, representing the death of everything he had worked to achieve while opening space for something new and unknown to emerge. I had to let go of being Danny Rivers the rock star before I could discover who Danny actually was beneath all that conditioning, he explained to other residents who were struggling with their own identity transformations. The music that emerged from Danny's spiritual rebirth was simpler, more intimate, and more emotionally honest than anything he had created during his commercial period. Working with other musicians at Morning Star, he began developing a style that combined his rock and blues influences with the folk traditions and Eastern spiritual music that permeated Commune culture. The songs address themes of personal transformation, spiritual awakening, environmental consciousness, and community solidarity, rather than the rebellion and hedonism that had characterized his earlier work. I was finally writing music that came from my actual experience, rather than what I thought audiences wanted to hear, he noted in his journal. The romantic relationship between Danny and Sage deepened as both individuals grew through their shared commitment to authentic living and spiritual development. Unlike the possessive and competitive dynamics that had characterized Danny's previous relationships with women who were attracted to his fame and wealth, his connection with Sage was based on mutual support for each other's personal growth and shared dedication to community well-being. They lived together in a small cabin that Danny had helped build using sustainable construction techniques, but they also maintained individual autonomy and encouraged each other's relationships with other community members according to the commune's principles of free love and emotional honesty. The legal and financial consequences of Danny's abrupt departure from his commercial career were severe, but ultimately liberating. His record label sued him for breach of contract, his former bandmates claimed ownership of songs he had written, and his business manager embezzled most of his remaining assets while he was incommunicado at the Commune. The resolution of these conflicts required months of negotiation and left Danny financially impoverished by his previous standards, but also freed him from the contractual obligations and commercial pressures that had been constraining his creativity. Losing all that money was actually the best thing that could have happened to me, he later reflected. It forced me to discover that my worth as a person had nothing to do with my bank account or my chart positions. The transformation of Danny's understanding of success and fulfillment was gradual but profound. Instead of measuring his worth through album sales and concert attendance, he began evaluating his life based on the quality of his relationships, the authenticity of his creative expression, and his contribution to community well-being. The validation he had once sought from music industry professionals and mass audiences was replaced by the immediate feedback of people who knew him personally and could assess whether his music served their spiritual and emotional needs. I realized that I had been addicted to applause, he told a visitor who was documenting Commune life. But applause from strangers who don't know you is just noise. Real appreciation comes from people who love you enough to tell you the truth about your art and your life. The music that Danny created at Morning Star began attracting attention from the broader counterculture community, but in ways that were completely different from his previous commercial success. Instead of record deals and concert tours, his songs spread through networks of communes, protest gatherings, and spiritual communities where people shared music as part of collective celebration rather than individual entertainment. Bootleg recordings of Morning Star gatherings circulated among hippie communities across the country, creating an underground following that appreciated Danny's new direction, even though it was completely uncommercial by industry standards. This is how music is supposed to work, Sage observed as they listened to reports of their songs being performed at other communes. It's supposed to be a gift that keeps giving, not a commodity that people own and sell. The challenge of maintaining their alternative lifestyle while dealing with outside pressures from law enforcement, curious media, and concerned family members tested the commune's commitment to its principles and Danny's dedication to his new path. Local authorities were suspicious of the communal experiment and frequently harassed residents through drug raids and building code enforcement. while journalists sought to sensationalize the story of the rock star who had gone hippie in ways that misrepresented both Danny's motivations and the Commune's actual practices. Danny's parents and former friends expressed concern that he had joined a cult or suffered a mental breakdown, unable to understand that his radical life change represented spiritual growth rather than psychological deterioration. The third year of Danny's life at Morningstar Ranch marked his complete integration into communal society and his emergence as one of the community's most respected members and creative contributors. The former rock star, who had arrived as a burnt-out celebrity seeking refuge, had evolved into a skilled craftsman, wise counselor, and spiritual teacher whose influence extended far beyond his musical contributions. His ability to bridge the gap between mainstream culture and alternative lifestyles made him particularly valuable in helping other refugees from conventional society adapt to communal living, while his continuing musical evolution demonstrated that artistic growth and commercial irrelevance could coexist beautifully. The relationship between Danny and Sage had matured into a partnership that exemplified the Commune's highest ideals about love, commitment, and personal freedom. They had chosen to formalize their bond through a community handfasting ceremony that emphasized spiritual connection rather than legal obligation, mutual growth rather than exclusive possession, and shared service to collective well-being rather than private romantic fulfillment. Their relationship had become a model for other couples at Morningstar, demonstrating that deep intimacy and individual autonomy could reinforce rather than compete with each other when people were committed to conscious communication and emotional honesty. The musical legacy that Danny was creating through his Commune work proved to be more influential and enduring than his commercial rock career, though in ways that couldn't be measured through traditional industry metrics. The songs he wrote at Morningstar became anthems for the Back to the Land movement, soundtrack for countless Commune gatherings, and inspiration for other musicians who were seeking alternatives to commercial music industry exploitation. His integration of rock instrumentation with folk traditions and spiritual themes helped define what became known as Commune music, a genre that prioritized healing and community building over entertainment and profit. The educational programs that Danny and Sage developed for visitors to Morningstar became nationally recognized models for experiential learning about sustainable living, conflict resolution, and creative collaboration. Their workshops on music as spiritual practice attracted participants from universities, religious communities, and other intentional communities who wanted to learn how artistic expression could serve personal transformation and social healing. Danny's teaching emphasized that everyone was inherently musical and that creativity was a birthright rather than a special talent possessed by only a few individuals. The broader impact of Danny's transformation extended beyond Morningstar to influence other musicians and celebrities who were questioning the values and lifestyle associated with commercial success. His example demonstrated that it was possible to abandon fame and fortune without abandoning creativity and influence, that artistic integrity and spiritual growth could be more fulfilling than material accumulation and public recognition. Several other prominent musicians visited Morningstar and were inspired to make their own departures from commercial music, creating a quiet revolution within the entertainment industry that prioritized authenticity over profitability. The challenges of maintaining Morningstar Ranch during the more conservative political climate of the mid-1970s required creative adaptation and strategic evolution that tested everyone's commitment to communal principles. Government harassment intensified under the Nixon administration, while economic pressures and internal conflicts threatened the community's survival. Danny's experience with business and legal matters, gained during his commercial music career, proved valuable in helping the Commune navigate these challenges while maintaining its essential character and values. His ability to communicate with mainstream media and legal authorities helped protect the community from persecution while preserving its experimental nature. The decision to document Morningstar's music and philosophy through a series of recordings that would be distributed freely rather than sold commercially represented Danny's final break with traditional music industry practices. Working with other Commune musicians and sound engineers, he produced albums that captured the spontaneous, collaborative spirit of their musical culture while sharing their message of peace, love, and sustainable living with broader audiences. These recordings were duplicated and distributed through networks of alternative communities, creating a parallel music economy that operated according to gift principles rather than market mechanisms. The personal growth that Danny experienced through his Commune years included healing from the addiction and depression that had characterized his celebrity period, developing skills and knowledge that connected him with practical reality rather than abstract fame, and discovering forms of satisfaction that were based on contribution rather than consumption. His transformation from an isolated, drug-dependent rock star to a healthy, integrated community member demonstrated the healing potential of alternative lifestyles for individuals who had been damaged by mainstream culture's emphasis on competition and material success. The influence of Danny's story on the broader counterculture movement was significant, but often unrecognized by historians who focused on more visible political activism rather than the quieter revolution of lifestyle experimentation. His example inspired thousands of young people to question conventional definitions of success and consider alternative approaches to creativity, work, and relationships. The communes that were influenced by Morning Star's model spread across the country, creating a network of intentional communities that continued the experiment in conscious living long after the initial hippie movement had faded from public attention. The reunion with his former bandmates that occurred in 1978, 7 years after his departure from commercial music, provided opportunity for healing old wounds and demonstrating how dramatically his priorities and values had evolved. His former colleagues were struggling with the typical problems of aging rock stars: declining album sales, substance abuse issues, financial troubles, and the difficulty of maintaining relevance in a rapidly changing music industry. Danny's obvious health, happiness, and sense of purpose stood in stark contrast to their continued pursuit of commercial success at the cost of personal well-being. The message that Danny shared with his former bandmates and other visitors was not that everyone should abandon their careers to join communes, but that everyone should examine whether their work served their authentic values and contributed to collective well-being rather than merely individual advancement. His transformation demonstrated that it was possible to change direction dramatically at any point in life, that perceived security could actually be a form of imprisonment, and that true success meant alignment between personal values and daily actions rather than external recognition or material accumulation. The legacy of Danny Rivers was ultimately not his rock star fame or his commune leadership, but his demonstration that individuals could choose spiritual growth over material success, authentic relationships over public recognition, and collaborative creativity over competitive achievement. His story became part of the larger narrative of the counterculture movement's search for alternative ways of organizing society and alternative definitions of human fulfillment. The rock star, who had abandoned his world tour to live in a hippie commune with a mystery woman, had discovered that the greatest mystery was not who Sage was, but who he himself could become when freed from the constraints of commercial culture and social expectations. In later years, as the commune movement evolved and many communities dispersed or transformed, Danny and Sage continued their work as teachers and counselors, helping individuals and communities navigate the ongoing challenge of living consciously in an unconscious world. Their relationship had proven that love based on shared values and mutual growth could endure far longer than romance based on attraction and convenience. Their music had shown that art could serve healing and transformation, rather than just entertainment and profit. Their life together had demonstrated that the hippie ideals of peace, love, and community were not naive fantasies, but practical approaches to creating more fulfilling and sustainable ways of living. The revolution they had joined was not about overthrowing governments, but about transforming consciousness. And in that quieter but deeper revolution, they had found both their calling and their home.